All right. So, welcome everyone to this month's Global Azure. I need to actually face this way, but I've got this funny part. I've got the screen showing over on this screen here. But so today is like I was just saying, we're trying to get this group really going. This is our second month in a row we've been meeting. Been using the benefit of being virtual, so it lets me bring in great speakers like this month we've got Kevin Griffin coming in. So there we go. So quick important note, we are recording this session. So if you don't want to be part of the recording, please exit, which it is on Twitch. So learn code, it's up on there, which actually that's the next part. So like I said, we are live streaming to Twitch right now because why not? And we will be putting it up on the Green Events and Technology YouTube channel. Sometime this weekend, I will get that up there. So I can tell you it'll be at least 24 hours after we end because that's the Twitch rules. So our sponsors, just Green Events and Technology, which is the company I run. It's really just the company that runs all this stuff and everything legal. A couple of had those informations. A couple of upcoming meetings. These are actually both in the .NET group. But on June 9th, we have Scott Hunter coming in. That should be a really great presentation. I actually saw him earlier this week, and definitely come because he basically ends with an AMA, and that was really great to hear a lot of his thoughts about things. So that'll be June 9th. And on June 18th, we have Michael Perry, who will be talking about ACID 2.0, how to use that to build better APIs and messages. So definitely, one of the smartest people around. So, well worth listening to that. Again, both of those are on Louisville.net meetup. And just want to point out a couple other meetups. I was just talking about Louisville.net meetup. We have the Louisville Tech Leaders meetup. So we meet the second Tuesday and fourth Tuesday. On the second Tuesday, we meet 8 o'clock in the morning, and it's just a coffee discussion. That's what it's called. So if you're a tech leader and you just want to learn from others and hear from others, it's a really great resource. Kind of taking some things that I was doing out at the Army with my peers out there, and it was the thing I missed the most from the Army, and so we have that. And then on the fourth Tuesday of the month, we meet at 5:30 p.m. and it's a social hour. We are still doing that even during the COVID period, and having fun with that. And then the other thing to mention is there's the Louisville IT Happy Hour, which IT Happy Hour has been going on for 6 or 7 years. We are continuing that in this pandemic period, just doing it online. That is a second Tuesday of the month. Now, with it being said, I don't know what we're going to do about June because that happens to be the same date as Scott Hunter, which was the only date I could get Scott Hunter. So we'll rearrange the IT Happy Hour. All right, I do have to promote Codepalooza because that's what I'm all about. So just real quick, I'm just trying to get down to where. So for $150. And we're working to keep on trying to bring that price down, and if we do, we'll refund people when we're able to bring that price down. But you get access to everything, right? So all the full day and half day workshops on the 19th, and then 132 1-hour sessions on the 20th and 21st. Everything will be, most everything will be archived. There's a couple talks where speakers have asked for it not to be archived, but it'll all be archived, and so you'll be able to. You don't have to worry about having to watch, if there's 2 or 3 sessions in the same period, no problem. Watch the one you really care about the most, and then you'll be able to watch the others, on the recordings. We are going to have open space, so the whole idea is you got a topic you want to talk about that, with other people, you just post it up there and then select a time, and then other people who are interested in that topic will come and join you and talk at that time. There'll also be online networking. There's going to be an online expo hall where you can still have video interactions with the sponsors. And then because we are still a real event, we are doing T-shirts, and we will be mailing those out. Because that's just T-shirts always been, we always, well, I wouldn't say we've always done cool T-shirts. Yeah, there's a particular year where a nice green T-shirt that probably made a mistake picking a green T-shirt. But at any rate, we'll have T-shirts. So, and like I say, tickets are on sale now. We actually finished. We already did speaker selections. We finished the schedule today, and that will be posted in the next couple of days. So then, we're streaming right now, but definitely want to promote. I stream every day on Tail Learn Code, and different topics each day. Well, sometimes same topic for a couple of days, but it's just like I said, it's tales about software development, learning from each other, and writing a bunch of code. That's 11:30 to 1 o'clock every day on Twitch. I hope you check that out. And then we will we'll keep the Zoom going. We'll turn off the recording, and actually we'll stop the streaming. But we'll have a social gathering after Kevin's presentation. So anyone who wants to stick around for that, please do. And with that, I'm going to be turning it over to Kevin Griffin. Kevin's been doing a lot of things with Azure Logic Apps. So I was really excited to get him here to talk about this. Plus, he already has warm-up, so he already knows what he's talking about, right?
I wouldn't say that. Let's not go overboard now, Chad.
Well, you've at least done it once.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's see.
Oh, here, I forgot to make you
I need some hostability. I need a superpower.
I did forget to do that. I said I was going to do that the moment you got on, and I did not do it.
All right.
There you go.
Give me that superpower. There we go. All right. Let's share a screen. Let's optimize for all the good things. All right. So now let's turn on some PowerPoint. Who doesn't love PowerPoint? All right. Well, I cannot see all the lovely faces out there. I do have Twitch up on another screen. So if you want to say hi and chat with me over there, that's cool. Well, we'll go and get started. This is pretty laid back. This is a session that actually grew up in the time of quarantine. I've never done this particular presentation in front of a real human audience before. So give me as much feedback as you want to, good, bad, or indifferent. But a little bit about me. My name is Kevin Griffin. I'm from Chesapeake, Virginia. So the friends in Louisville, I'm about, was Louisville a 10, 11-hour drive away from me? I'm in Southeast Virginia. But I'm a 10-time Microsoft MVP. My focus is primarily in ASP.NET Core, building web applications, and a lot of work with Microsoft Azure. And that's kind of what led me down the road to what we're talking about today. All my content's available at consultwithgriff.com. I'm available on Twitter, and also I'm on Twitch, both at OneKevGriff. I also try to do a daily stream where I talk about all kinds of random subjects, just like Chad does. And I would welcome you to subscribe, follow, all that good stuff, and follow along on the journey. I am currently live broadcasting from my shed quarters, and this is where I love doing all my talks. So I have a personal office in the backyard, and it's nice and quiet. It's away from the kids most of the time, but yeah, like right now they're in the house eating dinner and stuff. So it's nice and quiet outside. Because I always get asked where are the details for this particular talk, they're going to be available at consultwithgriff.com/21st century. And I will have slides up there. I'll also have various replays. So this replay, when it's available, will be up there as a link. Also, the last time I gave this talk to Boston Azure 2 weeks ago, there'll be a link there as well. So if you want to catch different versions of it at different times, all that stuff's available to you. And also a couple of resources that we might get along the way. I always throw them up on that site, so it becomes a repository for this particular talk. So this talk actually came out of a conversation I had with my very good friend, Joel Cochran. Joel is also in Virginia. He lives near Harrisonburg, and he does a lot with data warehousing and data factories and just massive amounts of data. And he said, hey, I want to show you this really cool thing on Azure I've been working with called logic apps. And I had already been familiar with Azure functions. Like, all right, I knew serverless, I knew what all that cool stuff was. And he said, no, let me show you logic apps. So he dived in and he showed me logic apps, and it was this really cool interface for building simple processes through things that we know very well, like workflows. And uh, that led me on to this idea of, well, can I build actual things that are not data warehousing or data factories with logic apps? Can I build things that just replace some of the background services that I have in my applications and my client applications? And most of your apps out there probably work similar to the diagram I have on the screen right now. You have a web app or you have some sort of client app, and you have places where you put data, but then you have things that you do background services in. And what's a background service? Well, it's everything that you shouldn't do inside of your web application or your main client facing application. For example, you shouldn't send email from your client application. You shouldn't process credit cards. You shouldn't do uh, process intensive cleanup or database manipulation. Any test that's reoccurring, not necessarily the place for your client side application. And this is where I go into a lot of different companies as a consultant. And this is one of the first things I start to point out is we have these applications whose sole function needs to be providing resources to users. And resources being data, views, JavaScript, CSS, all that good stuff. That's the sole function of a web application. All this other stuff isn't critical to that sole function of serving up content to a user. And so we usually move all that to another service, some sort of worker role. In Azure, there's a concept of web jobs. That's a good place to move a lot of this content off to. And I have, over the past couple of years, become a very big fan of a system called Hangfire. And if anyone out there has used Hangfire, you know what I mean. Hangfire is very low configuration. You can set it up in pretty much any application, whether it's ASP.NET, ASP.NET Core, just a plain .NET console application. And it talks to a database, whether it's SQL Server, you can pay and talk to Redis or to Mongo, you name it. The Hangfire takes care of all these different scenarios. But what was really great about Hangfire is when you need to do background processing, you don't just you stop what you're doing and do the processing. You kick off a notification to Hangfire that says, all right, some point in the future, I really need to send this email, or I need to process this credit card payment. I need to do this, need to do that. Hangfire will make a mental note of it, make a job, and it goes into a queue, and eventually that job will get taken care of. And I've just come to love Hangfire, except there are just so many situations where Hangfire does not work in the best uh, possible way for your application. One thing I've learned about Hangfire is that if you don't put a tremendous amount of time into the configuration, it will basically choke your web applications. And I had this with an app that we were doing a review on 2 or 3 weeks ago. Now, I wrote the app. So I wrote the app, I put Hangfire in, we put in production, and we're starting to see cases where our request time was in the 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 seconds. And these are for requests that should be returning in less than 100 milliseconds. So going and do some research, Azure Application Insights showed us that the critical path for a lot of the calls was due to Hangfire. And so, okay, well, let's take a step back. And we actually took a lot of our Hangfire background processors and we turned them into ASP.NET Core background tasks, which is another great solution if you're on ASP.NET Core. So we removed all this functionality off of Hangfire and we told Hangfire, okay, you only need to check for background tasks once every 30 seconds. Like we put this huge interval on it, and we put it in production, and all of a sudden we were seeing 70 millisecond requests. And it was because Hangfire was just sitting there. It was killing our system because its natural instinct is to always pull for new tasks, and that wasn't necessary in a lot of cases. Background tasks in ASP.NET Core are a great alternative because they're controlled by ASP.NET Core by Kestrel when they run, and you can take advantage of dependency injection pipelines and all the good stuff you already have in ASP.NET Core. So we moved a lot of our critical systems over to background services because they'll run they're running the same process, but they don't take up near the resources that Hangfire would take care of. Um, our Hangfire service looks like this basically all the time. CPU 100%, memory constant utilization. One of my longer term clients, we've been running Hangfire for a while, but we actually ended up moving Hangfire to its own background processor. So our web apps would put messages into Hangfire, but they would never process messages in Hangfire. That was always a separate app that was doing all the work. And it was specifically for this reason. We learned that Hangfire would just starve us. So I had this like revelation looking at Azure Logic Apps that, hey, this might be something where I don't need Hangfire anymore. Maybe Hangfire can take care of a lot of the background services that I'm writing code for. So let's start from the beginning. What is a Logic App? And I'm going to show you the interface. We're going to talk about all that stuff. But at its core, the easiest way for me to explain Logic Apps is that it's like Zapier or if this then that. If you're familiar with either of those tools, it's like Zapier for developers or for business people, which simply means it's a workflow. It's task oriented and it's pretty much low or no code. I could throw a business person with some uh, basic knowledge of just how a process works, and they could probably write a logic app without little intervention from me. And as I go through a couple different scenarios, we're going to see that low no code is a huge plus in a lot of these cases because if you're a developer, you you just instinctively want to write code. And I think as you mature, as you become more senior, you realize whenever you write code, you become the problem because when I write code, I never write code right the first time. And that's just me. You're perfect. You write code right the first time, every time. But I'm not. So I need to find ways that I can reduce the amount of code that I write. And Logic Apps really fit this mold. So if you're not familiar with Zapier or if this and that, it kind of works like this. You have some sort of trigger event that occurs. And this could be just a timer, some sort of recurrence. So maybe once every minute, every 5 minutes, every month, every day, every year. I don't care. Whatever this recurrence value is, it executes a trigger and then stuff happens. A trigger could also be something as simple as a webhook. So just a simple HTTP request to a very specific endpoint, and it kicks off a process. But Logic Apps even has supports for simple things like Gmail gets a new email. That's a trigger. Outlook or Office 365 gets a new email. It does something. Someone adds a file to a OneDrive folder or a Dropbox folder. That kicks off a trigger. And as I start saying a couple of these, you might start getting some ideas in your head. It's like, well, I've written code for that. Writing code for a webhook is not a big deal. Writing code that checks Dropbox to see if a folder has a new file in it, now you're talking about a little bit of effort. Well, whatever trigger gets executed, you then go through a series of actions. So, all right, on a recurrence, I want to execute an Azure function. I want to go talk to a SQL server. I want to make my own web request, so on, so on, so on. And there's a variety of different, we'll call them connectors, that Logic Apps can tap into and do a variety of different tasks. Logic apps are consumption based. So then the same line as Azure functions, you pay for what you use. So here I have an example of a couple of successful calls. You'll see they're taking anywhere between half a millisecond and 4 seconds. And I'm just paying for that time consumed. I have several Logic apps that run on a regular basis, but they run for half a second. And the total overall cost of running that Logic app or the series of Logic apps is a couple cents or a dollar or two. And I'm comparing that to an Azure app service. Like we buy a low end Azure app service for just web jobs that do background processing. That way, they're completely separate systems from our actual client applications, but all they do is background processing. Well, we pay like $90 a month for that for a low end system to just do basic processing. Well, what's better, $4 or $5 a month or $90 a month? And they're doing the exact same thing. I find that it's much easier to move all this uh, workflow over the Logic apps, pay less money. And it's a little bit easier to keep track of. Now, I have a whole bunch of examples I want to go into, but I'm kind of tired of slides. I want to get you into the Azure portal. And I want to walk you through the process. There's going to be a little bit of user interaction. So if you are on Twitter, go ahead and get Twitter up on the screen because I have been saying at the bottom of the screen, I want you to say nice things about me. I'm going to show you why. And chat, anywhere along the way, if someone has a question, just yell at me. All right. So I am in the Azure portal. I've created a simple throwaway resource group, so I don't have to care about any keys getting accidentally shown to the internet. It's all right. This is going to get deleted as soon as I'm done talking. But I haven't done any work yet. Let me make sure. All right, I have Zoom it turned on. I'm going to go in and create a new Logic app in the Azure Marketplace. I'll just say new. You don't have to give much information to create a Logic app. You just have to give it a name. So I'll call this Logic Louisville Twitter Checker. Set a location. You can pass data into log analytics like application insights for troubleshooting and debugging purposes. I rarely do that. I haven't had a reason to turn that on yet. But if you do, it's there for you. And we're going to skip tags because that's not necessary. Some quick validation. We'll create our Logic app. And usually this just takes a second or two. We'll give it a moment. Oh, there we go. We'll go into our Logic app. And this takes you into the Logic app designer. And if I do a zoom in, one of the things I really like about Logic apps is they try to give you a gentle introduction into Logic apps. There's a YouTube video you can watch if you want to learn more about the processes. Highly recommend it at least once. But really what you want to do is start with the trigger. Here's a couple common triggers that they see people using most often. I already talked about recurrences, webhooks, when a new file is created on OneDrive, but you can also tap into Azure Event Grid or service buses. You can even tap into Twitter, which that's really cool. I think that's where we're going to start. But before I do that, let's scroll down some more. There's our pre-built recipes that other users have used. So if you have a case where you want to receive an AS2 payload and reply with an asynchronous or synchronous MDN to sender, well, that's who doesn't want to do that? There's a recipe for you. Auto tier Azure blobs based off last modified time. Well, that's cool. Yeah, that's something you could do. Post a Slack if a new tweet matches some hashtag. Now, that's probably the most legitimate use case in this entire list for folks out there watching. That's not what we're going to do. But let's scroll up to the top. I'm going to select when a new tweet is posted. And I'm going to zoom out. This is the Logic Apps Designer, and we're going to walk through the process of adding a couple different actions. But the first thing we have to do is add a connection to Twitter. And Logic Apps does this through a concept called connectors. And a connector is just like making OAuth connections that get stored away. So I told it I'm going to connect to my Twitter account, and it is going to check when a new tweet is posted based off a search term. And we're going to use my my Twitter ID. So one Kev Griff. Don't start saying nice things about me yet. Hold your horses. How often do we want to check for new items? Well, we're going to check for new items once we'll say every 30 seconds. Because why not? It's not going to cost us much of anything to do this check. So these are the main parameters. There's some secondary parameters as well. I could tell it, well, don't start until tomorrow, or don't start till tomorrow in Pacific time. You can set a couple different parameters. All right. When we set this, let's assume this occurs. Well, what should the next step be when a new tweet is posted? Well, this takes us to a choose an action editor. I'm by default, you get some suggestions, and these are based off my usage in Azure in general. So things like request, meaning I want to make an HTTP request. I do some work with RSS feeds, so there's built-in RSS feed translation. You could talk to Twitter again. There's also some control statements, which I'll come back to in a moment. But if I go to all, I want to just show you this impressive list of different services. So I'm just going to scroll down here. There's a little bit of everything that you can think of. Do you use Basecamp 2 or 3? There's services in there for you. BizTalk, which I never used BizTalk, but a lot of folks who have seen my Logic Apps discussions say this seems a lot like BizTalk of the olden days. And I wouldn't know anything about that. Box, Cloud Connect, Cloud Immersive. I actually do some work with Cloud Immersive on a client app where we have to do some translation from a CSV into JSON. That works really well. General Daytime, Dropbox. The list goes on. There's a epic ton of services in here, and they're always adding new ones. And even better, you can write your own Azure connectors if you wanted to. I'm not going to talk about that because that is super complicated and I haven't quite figured it out yet, but it is something you can do if you have a service that's not in this list. So let's go ahead and scroll back up to the top. And what I want to do is actually go down here to text analytics. And I want to, well, let's click on that. For any service or connector that you select, you have a list of actions that it can handle. And so things like detect entities, detect language. I want detect sentiment. And I'm going to use the V2 preview because why not? And it's going to ask me to create another connector. So this connector is going to be text analytics. I need an account key and a site URL. Well, I do have that. Let me go back to my dashboard, and I already created the text analytics account because that takes a minute or two. It's not the best thing to do live. So let's go back into Lua. All right. Lua text check. We'll go into keys and endpoints. I don't care if you copy these because it's going away in a couple minutes anyway. We'll drop in our key. Oh, you didn't even see it. I'm sorry. All right. And that doesn't matter. And then we'll hit create. We'll give it a second. This is going to save the connector away. Again, connectors are basically saved off OAuth connections. And I'm saving them here in my current Logic app, but these connectors are reusable across multiple Logic apps. So if you build one, if you build 10, they can all use the same connectors without you having to reconnect every single time you build a new Logic app. So it's going to ask you for a parameter and say documents. So the way sentiment analysis works, you pass in a series of documents. It does the analysis on it and sends you back a collection of just sentiment results. So the first thing you need is a document ID. Well, it needs to be unique, non-empty document identifier. When you click on a text box, really any text box in Logic apps, you get what's called the expression editor. Now, the expression editor is really cool because it's a smart editor. You have two options: dynamic content and then expressions. As you can see, I'm in a box that accepts basically text content, and I can fill that in with just whatever I wanted to, or I can pre-fill it with variables. And these are predefined variables based off of previous actions I've had in my Logic app. So for documents ID, maybe the best way to identify this is with the tweet ID of the tweet that came in earlier. So let's go down. There's an original tweet ID. That works. And now I need to post in some text to analyze. Well, if I click on text, we'll scroll down. There's tweet text. There's also like original tweet text, all that good stuff. So we'll say tweet text. You know what, let me change this to tweet ID just by itself. Language. Now, language is one of multiple values, and it gives me a drop down of all the values I can choose. I'm going to say English. Now, this is just one document because the trigger only returns one tweet. I don't need to set up multiple documents. All right. So if I said add item, I could add another document to that list. All right. Next step. So the next thing I want to do is I want to take that sentiment and I want to put it into a Google Sheet. I know what you're saying, Kevin, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard, but it makes for a great demo. So I'm going to go out to Google Docs. Nope, wrong Docs. Wait, I'm sorry, Google Drive. And I have this file called Louisville tweet checkers. And I already put 3 columns in it. The tweet text, who was tweeted by, and then the score given to it by text analytics. So that exists. We'll go back into our Logic app. And let's go in our connector and I'll type in Google Sheets. And you'll see in Google Sheets, there's a bunch of things you can do with rows. I want to insert a row. I need to create a connector to a Google Sheet, which, happens over here. I'm going to move that off to another screen. I'm just connecting with my personal Google account. It works for just regular Gmail and also G Suite, whatever you're into. It's taking an unusually long amount of time for this to go through. Oh, well. All right. It's because I'm doing a demo. Anyway, wait. Say nice things about me on Twitter. Wait, don't get ready to say nice things about me on Twitter. I mean, you could also say mean things about me on Twitter, but you would get a low sentiment, and that would be visible for the entire world to see. So don't be that person. All right. So I need to select a file. And because this is connected to Google Drive, it can give me an intelligent file picker with all the stuff, all the files that I have inside of Google Drive. So it says, okay, I see the file, Louisville tweet checkers. Now, what worksheet do you want out of that file? So it can go into the file, see, oh, you have a worksheet called Sheet 1. And I should rename it for this demo, but I didn't. Well, it's going to go read that file, and then it's going to pull out the columns. Now, notice I'm using spaces, so it adds in the encoding for spaces. We're going to ignore that. Not much we can do about that here. But I'm going to select the 3 rows that I want to fill in. And I'm going to tell it, all right, well, I want to get the tweet text from when the tweet was posted. Let me go into the expression editor and say, all right, there's tweet text. All right, that's done. Who is it tweeted by? So let's go up, tweeted by. And it gives you this nice little description. Name of the user who posted the tweet. All right, and then the score. Well, the score is going to come from the text sentiment. So if I hover back over that, let me zoom over here. We'll see. Well, the text sentiment's only giving me the ID. It's not giving me the actual score. But you see more. If I say see more, it gives me everything that would come back with the text sentiment. And so there's most of these things have a body. That's the response. So you could take the response and do your own parsing over it if you wanted to. I don't do that. Then you also have documents. This is a collection of the documents that get returned. And then you have item, score, and ID. Now, I don't think Logic App does a good thing of telling you that these are properties inside of a collection. So here's what I'm going to do. So let's select score, because it's obviously what we want. A decimal number between 0 and 1, denoting the sentiment of the document. Let's select that. All right. Logic Apps did something really smart there. It realized that I was trying to access a property of something inside of a collection, and it automatically wrapped insert row inside of a for each. So I'm iterating, for eaching over documents, and for each document, it's going to add a new row to my sheet with tweet text and tweet by, and then the score. Now I know what you're thinking, Kevin. The tweet going in is always just one tweet. It's never going to be multiple tweets. It's kind of a worthless for each loop because we're only ever talking to one element. You're absolutely right. I'm not going to, but I could write I could write an expression that pulls that score out automatically from the first element. So I don't have this redundant for each. But I kind of like showing you the for each because when you do have collections, whether you're iterating over rows in a database or you're going through files on a file in file storage, you need to know that these things exist. So we'll go ahead and leave it the way it is. And you know what? I think everything's good. Let's save this off. And I'm going to hit run. Now, to see if it works, create a tweet. So someone out there, say something nice about me on Twitter using my name, #KevGriff. I mean, not everyone at the same time. And don't make me write my own nice thing about me on Twitter. Hey, so I see Tell Learn Code said something nice about me on Twitter. I see Sean said something nice about me on Twitter. So what actually has to happen now is it has to get into the search, the Twitter search. All right. So something posted. All right. So let's go into the debugger. And this is another thing I love about Logic Apps. For every run of a Logic app, you actually get this play-by-play of what happened. So a new tweet was posted. And you see, we have green check boxes. If you do test-driven development stuff, you know green is good. New tweet was posted. All right, the search term was #KevGriff. Scroll down. All right, so we had tweet text from Tail Learn Code. Hey, and there's a whole bunch of metadata in here. Let's see the actual raw output. And it spits out over here to the side. So remember, it's just HTTP requests. We see, all right, so tweet text. Hey, #KevGriff, these Logic apps are really cool. When was it tweeted? Who tweeted it? What language was it in? If it was a retweet or a mention or something like that, you can see, oh, well, I was mentioned in it. If other people were mentioned in it, all that metadata would come over as well. Some information about Tail Learn Code. That's all embedded into this request, and you can use that in any way, shape, or form that you want to. So let's close that. Well, that's cool. But what about the next step? Let's go into the text sentiment. Well, we passed in the text of the tweet. We also gave it the tweet ID. We're assuming that Twitter's ID is going to be unique. So let's pass it in. It came back with a score of 0.9937. That's a pretty good sentiment right there. That is almost perfect. I don't know how you get a perfect score, but that is pretty close to perfect. It also passes the ID back with it. So if I needed to correlate this later on with the original tweet, I could. So then we go into our for each. Now we don't need to do this. Notice you have a little pager up here at the top. So I have some cases where there might be 200-300 elements I have to go through, and I can see every run for every element in that list. All right, so I added to the file Louisville tweet checkers. We added the score, the tweet, and tweet by. Here's just some random O data I got back from Google Sheets. That's not useful, but that was a successful run. Let's go into our app. Hey, there we go. We see Sean is out there as well. And Sean said something nice. He didn't say something as nice as Chad did, Tail Learn Code, but he gave it a good solid effort there. So, all right. We're making some progress. Now, if I just leave this alone and go back up to the top and hit refresh, this is going to show me every successful iteration of the logic app. So as this runs or continues to run, it should be running on its interval. It will successfully put in more messages. Oh, something else popped in. Let's see. What was that? Green check. Good. Yeah. Good job, Sean. So we can just let this run and it's going to fill in the blanks and we see it all working from end to end. And I think that's really cool. That's actually the best version of that demo I've done. So we'll jump back in the slides. Now let me move things around so I can see chat. I didn't see any chatter in chat, so I'm going to assume everything's good to go. Oh, wait. Is there something in Zoom? Yes. I see something in there about parallel actions with a single trigger. Yes. So actually, and this is not something I've done in production. I just know you can. So if I go into the editor and I go back up to the trigger, I can create a parallel branch as well and have two actions occur at the same time. I've never done this. I just know this is something that can be done. So let's say, let me just come up with let me show you off variables. So if you ever need to create a variable for some reason, I create variables all over the place. So we'll create a variable called tweeted by. I set it to a string, and the value is going to be tweeted by. And you can also create another one. You can create as many of these as you want to. I've never done this. I would love to talk about potential use cases where this might be handy, but I could see you branching these actions as many times as you wanted to. And I think you can do this for, why is it not allowing me? Oh, it's because that's open. So you can do this on any set of actions. So you can go branch all the way down the line. Again, nothing I've done in production, but I would love to talk about potential use cases where you might want to do that. And another thing to keep in mind is when a for each executes, and let me see if I can bring up these settings. You get some concurrency control. So it will actually execute the for each in parallel, asynchronously, and then bring it all back together at the end. If you had a reason where you need to do a for each synchronously, one at a time, you could turn on concurrency control and tell it, well, I only want to have like 2 degrees of parallelism, only process 2 elements at a time, or one element at a time. This might be useful if you're talking to a web service that has rate limiting on it. You don't want to throw 50 requests at it at the same time. Maybe just send like 2 or 3. So you have a little bit of control here. That was a really good question. I'm glad you brought that up. All right, back to this code. All right, so I was talking about the expression editor, and I love the expression editor because there's basically two sides of it. You have the dynamic content, which is based off the triggers and the actions that are running that you've already defined. And then you also have the expression editor. And the expression editor is like a simple programming language. If you need to get the current date time, you call UTC now, and that returns the date time. There's stuff in there for simple adding, subtracting, multiplication. You can do date time manipulation. You can do string manipulation. You can parse JSON. You can parse CSVs. You can do all kinds of crazy stuff inside the expression editor, and you can take these expressions, and that's really its own talk all on its own. It's just talking about how to use the expression editor. But you can build a pretty complex expression with a mixture of dynamic content and then programming language. It's like using Excel, essentially. If you ever used Excel or Google Sheets, you can just start typing some sort of macro or command into a cell, and Excel figures out what to do. The expression editor is the same way. Well, one of the things I really love about the workflow, and because you can go through and look at a workflow step by step by step and see every input and every output, this makes it really useful for checking your errors. So on the left side of the screen, I have a bad request. That's because I did something dumb. I made a request to an endpoint. In this case, it was an Azure function, and I forgot to put in a job ID. So it threw a 400 because I validate my input in the Azure function like you should. And I said, all right, invalid. The job ID is missing. That returned a 400 to my logic app. And my logic app said, hey, you got a bad request. Not only that, when it gets an error code, it's going to it has an automatic retry policy, which is really useful. So it might try at different times up to 4 times, and then it's just going to fail outright, which you can override. You could tell it, well, let's wait 10 seconds and try again, or try up to 30 times. Because sometimes you have dumb, pesky services that never work the first time, but they will probably work the third or fourth time you try. And it's just easier to just retry until you get a success. That's all built in the logic apps. You just have to set the settings. I had another point here. I totally forgot what it was, but oh well, we'll move on to the next thing. So you can one of the things I don't talk about in here as well is that because all these different tasks are asynchronous, and you have to deal with things like timeouts and all that crazy stuff. Logic Apps also has built-in support for what they call the asynchronous patterns. So if you have a logic app, this is a great example, a logic app that might take more than 2 minutes to execute. I happen to have a scenario where that's the case. I can return a certain status code. It's like a 202 back to logic apps, and logic apps will stop waiting for that particular call to return. Instead, it will pull an endpoint every couple of seconds, checking the status of an Azure function as it's executing. I kind of wish I had a set of slides for that now, because that's a really useful example. Oh, I remember the point I was going to make. Retry policies. Why is this really cool that it's built into logic apps to begin with? Well, have you ever coded a retry policy? Now, there are tools out there that do an amazing job of that. Poly. If you're writing .NET code, use Poly. Poly has this stuff built into it, but you still have to configure it. You're still writing code to do this very basic thing where if code fails, let's just retry 10 seconds later or 3 minutes later. I don't care. Just retry. That stuff's built in the Poly. But you still have to write that code. In Logic Apps, you just say, all right, now automatic retry, or I can override the settings. Perfect. Now, without going through the step-by-step for a lot of different scenarios, I want to talk about a couple of scenarios that I have physically implemented. And these are scenarios that help basically guide my understanding of how Logic Apps work. The first scenario is processing incoming email. A client sent me a request, and they said, we have this email account we've set up, and someone is going to send us an email to it once a day, and that email is going to have an Excel file in it. We want to take that Excel file, take the 25 or so rows out of it, put them into our database, and then show those results to our users. And I'm like, cool. All right. Well, I thought about writing that code. Now, how would you write that code? You have to write an SMTP provider that talks to your email provider. Okay. That off the shelf stuff you can just pull in from NuGet and do most of that work. You need to take the attachment. Okay. You have to create a stream reader. And then that's usually at least 3 trips to Stack Overflow because no one gets that right the first time. And then, all right, once you get the file, you have to open it up and process the Excel content. All right, that means you're working with the Open Office standard or whatever they call it. So you go get that package. Wait, no one knows how to use that package, so you go get the third party community supported package that does all the easy stuff for you. You learn how to use that, and about 6 hours later, you might have something that works until you get that first email and it just all fails. Okay. That's exactly what was going through my head. And I had this new tool in my toolbox called Logic Apps. I'm like, let me see how I can do this in Logic Apps. I started with a trigger. The trigger was when a new email arrives. I filled in some of the blanks. Okay, well, we're checking and then this is Gmail. So my client uses G Suite. I piped right into G Suite and said, okay, when a new email arrives to the inbox, I want to check for the subject. Now, the subject of this email was called, it was actually a partial subject. So, yesterday's top 25. Don't care about importance, don't care if it's starred. I want to include the attachments because it should have an attachment. And I want to check every 15 minutes. Now, I could make that a smaller polling session if I wanted to, but it's not a big deal. All right. Trigger occurs. Gmail or the Gmail connector is going to give me the message information. But if I want the attachments and all that stuff, I have to go back to Gmail and pull that email details. So that's what I do. I tell it, well, take the message ID from the trigger and go give me the message, and they include the attachments. Now, in hindsight, I might have been able to do all that work from the trigger, but this works. And when code works, you just don't mess with it. I get the email in, and I want to create a couple of variables. And these are because I'm going to deal with magic strings, and I don't like magic strings in my code. I don't like magic strings in my Logic apps. So I tend to create variables for things that that would potentially be a magic string. And I'll show you why. So create a variable, call it table name. That's going to, and really it shouldn't be called table name. It should be called worksheet name because that's the name of the worksheet in the Excel doc. But naming things are hard. That's what I went with. So I created this variable called table name. And then because attachments can potentially be more than one attachment, it comes in as a collection. And I added a conditional. You can do if-thens all the live long day in your Logic app. So I set up a condition that said, well, if the attachment name contains XLSX, meaning is this an Excel file, then I want to go, I go to, it's a Cloud Immersive. It's a third-party app that can take an Excel file and convert it into JSON. So you can actually do some real work over it. And then, false, it does not do anything at all. Let's iterate over every attachment that we have. And you might have multiple attachments. If someone has an email signature, there might be a graphic on there. So you need to make sure you're checking the attachments as they come in. Let's talk about Cloud Immersive for just a second. Notice it says preview next to it. I had gone into this thinking, well, can't I just use Excel Online and do all this work for me? And the answer is yes, but that's only if you have an Office 365 account. I don't, so I can't take advantage of that stuff. So I had to use Cloud Immersive. And Cloud Immersive is free to a certain extent, so it's not costing me anything extra to use it. But that gets all my data into JSON, and I can work with JSON. which then leads me into what's called for each 2. Now, let's just side note. You notice the names of these kind of suck. You can rename them in the editor, which I'll show you here in a moment. So inside of the for each 2, I want to iterate over all the rows in the Excel file, which it's going to be more than one. So there's a header and then there's a bunch of other rows. Well, I put another condition in there. And that condition is specifically to weed out the header row because there was no other process to weed out the header row. So I told it, all right, let's go get the items from the row that I'm working with. And if the cell name is equal to A1, meaning if it's the first row, first column, all that good stuff. Well, I want to skip that. And for every other row where it's false, I need to basically put that data into a database. Now, I hit a roadblock here. And that roadblock was the data that comes back from Cloud Immersive for date times doesn't come back as a date time string. It comes back as an Excel date time, which it doesn't matter if you're hip on your Excel or not. An Excel date time is actually a number, but it's not a number like from the beginning of time, like some date times or SQL date times. It's the what's it called? Like the epoch time from January 1st, 1990 or 1900. And it's the number of seconds since then, which is a really horrible way to store date times because there's no easy, quick way to convert to that. And using the tools inside of Azure Logic Apps, I couldn't really get something that would parse that into a date time the way that I wanted to. And I had said to myself, this would be really nice if I could just write some code. Like this is like 3 lines of code to fix this problem. Turns out, yeah, that's exactly what you can do. I can use Azure Functions. Azure Functions, I can just write some code, spits back a result, and I can move forward. So I went and created my Logic App. I'll show you the Logic App here in a moment. And I told it, I want to pass in the Excel datetime value that I get from the Excel file, and it will convert that into a datetime string. That datetime string gets passed into my insert row action, which I set up a SQL Server connector to my database, told it, here's the table I want to talk to. It went to the table, pulled out all the columns from that table, and all the ones that have an asterisk with them, these are the non-nullable columns. So I went through and I started filling the blanks. It's passing the subject line, it's passing the date from the email, it's passing the file names, then sales rank and everything else. That came from the Excel document. And then event date came from the Azure function. So I pull all this stuff together and that inserts a row into my database. And I thought this was extremely cool. All right, I already talked about there's hundreds of connectors that we choose from. They're all reusable. Each connector has multiple triggers and multiple actions. I don't need to go over that anymore. I love this concept of Azure Functions as a fallback, and that's specifically why I tried to basically build this talk around Logic Apps and Azure Functions, because I think they're like bologna and cheese. They're like PB&J. They're fantastic, and they really scratch that itch where as developers we say, well, if I could only write code, this would not be a problem. So my date value to date function, this is what it looks like. It is pretty simple. There's a little bit of cruft and ceremony for just being an Azure function, but I pull the data out of the query that gets passed into it from Logic Apps, and I do some parsing to make sure it's coming in as a number. Now I have to pull that in as a double, but then I just do datetime parse on January 1st, 1900, and then I add, it's days, I'm sorry. Yeah, I believe that's what you do. So you pass in the number, that passes out the new date, that's what you pass into to the result. So, yay, Azure Functions to the rescue. And you can see in my Logic app that the date value that I'm passing as a query, that actually turns into a query string. and that's what dumps into my Azure function. So since then, so this was actually the first example I ever did of building this type of workflow. And this is where I really got the idea that I could combine Logic Apps and Azure Functions into something really powerful. So yeah, we just kind of moved on from there. Let me talk about one more scenario, and then we'll just open up for general questions and discussions. And that's webhooks. Because I had another scenario where we use Discourse for forums. And if you ever use Discourse before, it's amazing. It's by Jeff Atwood, the guy who helped build Stack Overflow. And it's an amazing rethinking of how forum software should run. Well, we use it for one of my clients' communities. And my client has so many use cases where they want to know when certain things occur in the forums environment, the Discourse environment. And the easiest way to get that data is through webhooks. So I looked at, well, I had built a lot of this logic into our existing app. Like pulling a webhook is pretty straightforward in ASP.NET Core. But what you do after the webhook that usually took a lot of effort. So I looked to see how well I could support webhooks with Azure Logic Apps. Well, there's a trigger for it. It's when an HTTP request is received, you get your own custom URL that you post to, and you set that as your webhook. And then Logic Apps asks you for the JSON schema of what the request body would look like. And the best way to do this is a little option here at the bottom that says use a sample payload. Well, I can go into Discourse and tell it, well, give me a sample request, copy, paste it into that little utility. It will generate the JSON schema for me, which is fantastic. Now, this is important because that JSON schema turns into mappings in the expression editor down the line. So I can just say, well, let's pull out admin, which is a Boolean. Let's pull out avatar template, which is a string. That's all ready mapped for me. I set a whole bunch of variables because, again, I don't like magic strings, and I have certain things I'm looking for in my application. So topic IDs, topic types. I have webhooks I'm going to make on my own to other services. So I want to put those URLs somewhere central. So if I need to go change anything in the future, I have the one place I go to change it. We initialize all the variables. Then I do some condition checking. So based on the request that came in from the webhook, I want to check to see, is the message type equal to the topic type that I'm expecting? Do the slugs match or do the IDs match? In this particular scenario, we were checking to see if someone had replied to a thread. So we have a couple threads that just have regular up-to-date information in them. So we just check to see if that thread has been updated. And we do that through condition checking. And the best part is, if that thread hasn't been updated, we just throw the request away. We've spent 400 milliseconds on this process, and it costs us literally nothing to do. So if the message is what we expected it to be, we want to go update a row in a database, which is simple. We already know the row we need to update, and it's just changing a datetime value to the value that we got from our webhook. And then I actually need to notify all my users that this particular element's been updated. And the way we do that in particular is we make a webhook request to our own web server. And our web server is using SignalR. So then it just sends a SignalR notification to all the connected clients saying, hey, something's been updated. It doesn't need to worry about the process of checking all the incoming webhooks from Discourse and then making the request via SignalR. All it does is it's one line. All right, SignalR notify, go. And that's done with the HTTP request. So the HTTP post to our own web server. And that's why I have the variable with our webhook URL that it just sends that data. We do the update. Everyone gets notified. And everything just kind of works magically the way that you would want it to. I think that's really cool. Now, I've shown nothing but the editor up to this point, And it's really important to know that that's not all you have to work with. There's a built-in code schema. So all that cool designer workflow translates into JSON, um, whether you like that or not. But what's interesting about this is you can edit this. So if you don't like the name execute store procedure v2, you could go change it to run the something something store procedure. The only problem, and here's, let's see, let me get my mouse back. You'll see here is I have one that's called execute store procedure v2. Then I have execute store procedure v22. All right, because they're both execute store procedure tasks. This is something I might want to go in and rename. Your only requirement is if you rename it, you just need to be consistent everywhere else. Because if there is another task that relies on knowing that name, you need to make sure you change it everywhere. Now, the one thing I wanted to demo today, and I didn't have a chance to get it all set up and looking nice, was that there is now support inside of Azure VS Code. Because the next most common question I get is, well, Kevin, how you handle this with source control um, and all that good stuff? Well, first, I'll just answer that question now. Whenever you edit a Logic app, it actually creates a new version. So you notice we have a versions tab over on the sidebar. And this will show you every version of the Logic app that you've created. And you might have a lot of them. This is not what I would consider the best workflow, because if you're making a lot of big changes to your Logic app, this is a lot to deal with. And one of the things I've done in my other apps is I will take the code view, copy it, I will paste that into a JSON file in source control, and I will manage the changes myself. This is actually getting better because there is a new preview extension in VS Code, so called Logic Apps. And it's in preview. Let's just go to the site because I actually didn't get this working easily enough. Let's scroll down. So there's so what you could do is you can build out these schemas, and there's also a designer view as well. You can build out these schemas in VS Code. You can save them into your source control, but then you can also deploy them from VS Code. So this can link to an Azure Logic app up in the cloud, or create an Azure Logic app, and it will automatically sync these changes between VS Code and what you have actually running up in the cloud. And it's really cool. So you see here is the designer. It's a bad view. When you see it takes the JSON and creates a designer view. The current version is read only, but I believe they are working on a version where you can actually use the designer as a GUI to do all your development. So this is really cool, and this is new. The last time I did this talk, I wasn't allowed to talk about this, but now it's public, and we can talk about it all day long. You can also monitor your Logic apps running up in production. I haven't tested this yet either, but you see all the runs, and you can go through and do the debugging on them, just like we were doing up in the Logic app. All right. So, and then the last thing I'll show you here is if I go to API connections, you can see here are all the connections to different services I have: cognitive services, Google Sheets, Twitter, and these are stored away in my resource group. So you see I have cognitive services, Google Sheet, Twitter. If I create another Logic app, I can just reuse these. And that's one of my best pieces of advice just for sanity. If you're going to start using Logic apps, actually create a separate resource group for them. That way you can keep them all together. And I think the fun part is you can do cost analysis on just the Logic apps themselves. Now this isn't going to show me anything because I haven't been using it long enough, but I have it for some apps where this is just a couple cents. And for one of my client apps, we actually have one Logic app that uses quite a bit of resources, but it's like seven to $15 depending on the month. But we actually dove down and said, all right, here's a Logic app we need to go optimize, and went back, made some changes to it to optimize the process. We actually cut the cost in half by just making some simple optimizations. Um, but with that, I could talk about one other scenarios, which is just blob storage. So if you have questions, now's the time to start putting questions into the chat. But blob storage, this was the first thing I did for my client in Logic app. So I had this new toy, and the particular problem I had was we wrote this app a couple of years ago, and we were putting stuff in the blob storage in Azure. And like most developers, we were under a crunch. And I said, all right, well, we're dealing with text files, CSVs, that are anywhere between like 20 kilobytes and like at most like 30 megs, but it's 30 megs like once every couple days. And I was like, all right, we'll just put that in the blob storage. And so put in blob storage, put in blob storage. I'm not going to worry about cleaning up right now because we can always come back and fix it later. Blob storage is pretty cheap. Well, guess what happens when you forget about it? And then like 3 years passes and you have accumulated like a terabyte worth of CSV files in blob storage. That actually accumulates to a decent chunk of money that is completely wasted because it's not like we're going back to these CSVs. We're just storing them temporarily so we can do some processing on them, but they're not necessary after 2 or 3 minutes after upload. So I'm like, all right, I should fix this problem. Now, I could write some code. This could be a background service that runs every day, every week. It doesn't matter. But have you ever used the Azure SDK for storage? It's gotten way better. Like, don't get me wrong. It used to be pretty horrible, but it's still not just like sit down, write the code, you're done. It's checking Stack Overflow a couple places, reading the docs in GitHub. It takes a considerable amount of effort to just write the basic code that connects to blob storage, get the list of blobs by the date, and then go delete the blobs that you want to delete. So I'm like, all right, let me try this in Logic Apps because my friend Joel had showed me how to use it. I started with recurrence because I don't want to. I think I could have just, yeah, there was no real better way to build this. It, yeah, let me stop you there. You're saying, Kevin, couldn't you said like time to live on blobs? Yes, we didn't do that 3 years ago. Oh well. So I created recurrence. I said, well, every week on Sunday, let's go look at blob storage. And I want to get all the blobs out of the container that we have up there. And I'm going to pull them back as a flat list. And I want to check the modified date. So for each blob that we return, I want to see if the modified date is less than whatever threshold I have. I think it was like 90 days. No, I think I just said 30 days. So if last modified date is older than 30 days ago, then it needs to get deleted. And that's what true is. So let's just delete that blob. And the first time it ran, it took about 4 minutes to process all these entries. Now takes like 2, 3, 4 seconds to run through all the blobs that doesn't need anymore. I love this example because then I just went into that code view, I copied it, and no, I didn't copy it. There's another nifty function. You can go into any Logic app and you can clone it. So I cloned it, and using the clone, I just went through, changed the blob storage I was looking at, and actually cleaned up another container that had some old data in it that we didn't need anymore. So they're extremely useful. Saved the day. Actually saved a ton of money because I didn't have to write code to do it, and it worked flawlessly. And I keep going back to the idea of code I don't have to write is code that's probably going to work. So I like to embrace the low no code mentality. But with that, anyone out there in Zoom or on Twitch, if you have questions, I'm open to any questions or discussion you want to have. Here, let me. I don't know what slide I want to put up. Here, I'll put up my contact me slide. That's better. But ask me any questions you have. I love having discussions about this. I try to spend a little bit of time in it every day, just expanding my knowledge. I've seen people do some super cool things with logic apps, and I know I'm just scratching the surface. But so if not, thank you everyone for hanging out with me tonight. Bueller. Let's see. I have chat.
I was talking, but I have my mic muted. So I was. We're definitely. I see people are thanking everyone. Thank you for this. Which it was. It was a really good talk. I really liked what you showed.
Thanks.
I looked at these a little while ago, and I never really got much more than just looking at them. I know I need to look at this some more.
It's fun when you find that first use case where this solves the problem. The things I didn't talk about, that the first scenario I mentioned where I read the email and I put it into a database, that ended up taking me end to end less than an hour to do. And I think about writing that code. That code would have taken me easily like 4 or 5 hours. And that's assuming I got it right on the second or third try. The last example I have of blobs cleanup, that took 10 minutes. That literally took no time at all. It would have taken me more time to install the correct NuGet package, go pull my connection strings for Azure Blob Storage, and then reading the Stack Overflow articles of, how do you get the list of blobs by where a date condition exists? That would have easily taken me an hour by itself, and then run through testing of all these different processes. So I've saved so much time by using logic apps.
Well, it really resonated with me when you talked about Hangfire, right? Because we're using those, but they're causing us problems.
Yeah.
And I gotta admit, I didn't think about logic apps as a possible. We've been thinking about replacing some, and we have replaced some with Azure functions.
Yeah.
But there's some of them where we don't even need any code. I'm definitely gonna. In particular, I know someone who tomorrow I want them to watch the recording of tonight's session. All right, cool. Let me get the live stream stopped.
All right.
And
thanks, Twitch.
Yes, so thanks everyone for who joined us on Twitch. Oh, I have it right here.